Thank you for finding us again. No stoplights. Want to thank our sponsors, Francis Marion University, Carolina Bank, Mickey Finn's, Victor's, Marlboro Petty Electric Co-op, McCall Farms, Pepsi of Florence, PLC Commercial Real Estate, and McLeod Health. I do want to say this. I ain't much into altruism. I mean, I'm as self-centered and self-preservationist minded as anybody else is, but at times I feel like I owe it to humanity. Some of my good and close friends. Now I looked at these sponsors and I thought about it a second ago. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's about equally divided. Some of these are Gamecocks, some of these are Tigers. So I want to be careful not to make it about the Gamecocks or the Tigers, but rather speak in generalities. My sidekick on the radio and in podcasting is distraught. He's deeply troubled to the point of I'm worried about him getting near a tall building. So I want a cathartic, therapeutic comes to mind, and I guess Gamecock Nation in general. But once again, I want to be respectful of our sponsors and understand that there aren't all Gamecock fans. This is not our Garnet Trust podcast, but rather kind of a convergence of sports and entertainment and politics. And I want to begin by saying this. I have lived the majority of my existence believing that when things go south and don't work out, it's probably more incompetence than it is some nefarious or diabolical conspiracy. As I've gotten older, I've gotten far more cynical. I have always been somewhat of a contrarian, but I have begun, let's do this. I've begun kind of nudging. This would be the FMU Cup would be incompetence, and the Victor's Cup would be conspiracy. I have forced the realm of incompetence to share the stage with conspiracy theory. I'd like for that not to be the case. I'd like to believe that conspiracy theories are limited to kooks and nuts and some of the hayseeds that don't know any better. Maybe I'm a kook and a nut and hayseed that don't know any better, but I use the terminology scratch my head. Some things I don't understand. I put something on Facebook earlier this week about the Gamecock and LSU game. I was raised to believe that crying is for babies. Complaining is for unhappy people, and the fair comes in October. And I still ascribe the majority of my opinions and notions and dispositions to that theory of life. But at times you gotta scratch your head. And I told my good friend Dave Baker, I need stitches. I mean, I need to go to urgent care and get some stitches and how much I've scratched my head from what happened Saturday. Now I want to go back a little bit to the debate, because beginning a week ago Tuesday, we had a presidential debate. I felt like the candidate of my choosing was debating three adversaries, one being the candidate Kamala Harris, the other being the ABC moderators. There's kind of a story floating around out there in political land about a whistleblower that said they were conspiring. They were conspiring. It was not incompetent moderating. It was a damn conspiracy, and they had worked with the Harris campaign. I don't have any idea if that's true. One of the great hedge fund managers, Bill Ackman, is pushing that narrative on Twitter, and I guess he would be a well-educated and wealthy conspiracy theorist to suggest that we need to explore whether or not that's the case. But I want to speak to Gamecock Nation, and then I want to transition to college football in general. There were a lot of things that happened in that game Saturday that leave me scratching my head. I'm not ready to say it's total incompetence. I'm not ready to say it's total diabolical and nefarious conspiracy theory. It may be a little of both. Couple of data points that I think are important. South Carolina and LSU both had 8 penalties with about 7 minutes left in the game. From the 7-minute mark to the end of the game, South Carolina had 5 penalties, LSU had 1. So you would kind of ask yourself, how do you go the game and both teams get about the same number of penalties? You get to the last 7 minutes, referee looks up at the scoreboard, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know, and he says, hey, this blue blood's in a battle with the also ran, and that ain't the way this thing was supposed to be. Once again, is it subconscious? Is there intent? I don't know. I don't have any idea, but it's factual that South Carolina had 16 points taken off the scoreboard because of penalties, 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. there is question in every call. There are always going to be ball games that could be decided by a play or two or a call or two. And, the referee missed his holding, and he didn't call that roughing the passer, the pass interference, the phantom offensive pass interference. I've heard that 100 times from my Gamecock buddies. But I'm not here to suggest that the officials were in on a conspiracy, and the conspiracy was to protect the blue blood at the expense of the also-ran. What I am here to say is that in my life in politics, and I go back to conspiracy or incompetence, in my life in politics, I learned, and a good friend of mine said it better than I, money's the answer, now what's the question? Let me say that again. Very prophetic. Money's the answer, now what's the question? So here's why I'm scratching my head, nearly a week after LSU came from behind and beat our producer Dave Baker's beloved Gamecocks. They're his Gamecocks when they lose. They're my Gamecocks when they win. The college football playoff is in its first season. We had the 14 playoff, and now we've got a 12-team playoff. And in the process of negotiating who gets what and how many teams are allowed and where do they come from and how many at-larges and do we play at home stadiums or on neutral sites, and we kind of cooked up a model that everybody agreed would be the initial season, the inaugural season of the 12-team college football playoff. When you read the data, and I tried to really dig into the data a few nights ago, you see that the SEC and Big Ten share about 60% of the revenue. It's about a $1.3 billion to $1.5 billion endeavor. College football is, a $5 billion by the time you figure television rights and budgets and ticket sales and radio revenue, everything that goes into the devil's brew of college football. It's about a $5 to $7 million a year enterprise. A lot of money. Billion, 1,000 million is what a billion is. The college football playoff is a $1.3 to $1.5 billion element, or I guess segment of college football. And the SEC and Big Ten, because the Big Ten added USC, Southern California, USC's in Columbia, USC West, they added UCLA, they added Oregon and Washington. USC would be a blue blood. Southern Cal would be a blue blood. Oregon would be not a blue blood, but a very respected program. Washington has won a national championship, and UCLA has won a couple of national championships. So you've got the Big Ten expanding out west. It's kind of a national conference now. And then you've got the SEC adding two of the most valuable programs in all of college football, one's being the most valuable brand in all of college football, the Texas Longhorns and Oklahoma Sooners. So you've got these two behemoths of conferences that are pretty much dominating college football. I get it, Tigers. You're damn good. You won a couple of national championships. Miami's a good program. Oklahoma State's a good program. But the intrigue and interest in college football today is largely the SEC and Big Ten. The Gamecocks happen to have a seat at that table. They were invited into the SEC in 1992. But let's go to Saturday, because I think there's more than meets the eye. And I'm not accusing officials of anything. I'm not saying Greg Sankey needs to get off his ass and do a better job of managing the officials and make bigger investments. I do have a theory that I think is interesting. I equate the SEC, college football in general. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar machine. I don't say Prince money, but it had the advantage for a long time of not having to pay the help. I mean, I was in the truck body manufacturing business. I could have made a hell of a lot more money building truck beds if I didn't have to pay welders. But we had to pay welders. Well, for a long time, college football got away with not paying players, generating enormous amounts of revenue, sharing the revenue with the university administrators and conferences. The NCAA gets their big share. All of a sudden, we found out they were breaking every antitrust law in America, and the court ruled you can't do that anymore. Out of that came a reorienting of college football. As part of the reorienting is the initial and inaugural 12-team college football playoff. So why would you be suspicious about what happened in Columbia Saturday? Let's say it's incompetence, and they just missed a few calls. Hell, everybody does that. Every game that I've ever watched, my team probably caught a few breaks and they probably had a few bad deals. But all of a sudden, you've got, and this is where the conspiracy theory kind of nudges itself into the equation. You've got multiple billions of dollars. You've got a playoff system where a panel of experts will choose the 12 teams that play in the playoffs. And for every SEC or Big Ten team, I've done the back of napkin math, and I'm rounding up, it's roughly $100 million. Let me say that again. For every Big Ten and SEC school that make the college football playoff, it generates somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million that goes to that conference. If the Big Ten adds a team, they get an extra $100 million. If the SEC adds a team, they get approximately another $100 million. What is the likelihood that my beloved Gamecocks make the playoff? About zero. I mean, even if they beat LSU, you got to play Alabama, you got to play Oklahoma, you got to play Missouri, you got to play Ole Miss, got to play Texas A&M, you got to play Clemson. I mean, there's a strong likelihood that 7 wins is about as good as they do. Catch lightning in a bottle, you win 8. You may win 6 now that you beat Kentucky, but you're not going to be in the 12-team playoff. LSU, on the other hand, has a loss to Southern Cal. And they're a blue blood. I mean, they're legitimately one of the better programs in all of America year after year. They may not make the playoffs, but there's a chance they make the playoff. So you've got officials making calls on the field, and there is no way in hell that you could convince me that they don't know some of the math. I didn't say they know for every team that makes the playoff there's an additional $100 million, but they know that for every SEC team that makes the playoff, the conference that strikes them or strokes them a check every weekend to call a conference game, their life is better. And I think you've got to be unbelievably naive to not at least put that on the table. I didn't say it's a conspiracy. It could be gross incompetence. We found out that for the officials, it was the first SEC football game they've ever called. Maybe it's just, deer in the headlight. Maybe they got lost in the moment. I don't know. And I'm not saying every call was a bad call. I'm not saying that the Gamecocks got jobbed. I'll let you decide whether they got jobbed or not. I'm just proposing that when you increase the amount of money that is at stake or at risk and who wins game 1 or game 3, who makes the college playoff system, who wins the SEC, does an additional Big Ten team make the playoff? Does an additional SEC team? I go back to my good friend who once told me, money's the answer. Now what's the question? And that's kind of the solace that I find. I mean, I don't want to say I laugh about it, but I just accept that as part of the equation. It's a little bit like Clemson fans. We're talking a lot about Gamecocks here. When the Tigers go to Chapel Hill to play North Carolina in basketball, when the Tigers go to Durham to play the Duke Blue Devils in basketball, I mean, I'm not a Tiger fan, but I watched the last 5 minutes of the basketball game. You know what I watched? I watched North Carolina Duke shoot free throws. And I watched a Clemson player go to the locker room with a bloody nose. It's just protecting the brands. Is it right? No. Should it happen? No. But I think you've got to be unbelievably naive to believe that in college athletics today, which as much money as in play and as much as at stake, they're in some consideration, whether intentionally, whether not, whether it is incompetence, whether there's some grand conspiracy to make sure these brands are protected. You're unbelievably naive not to at least consider whether some calls are made because some brands need to be protected. Some calls are not made because some also brands don't deserve the protection.